Good morning. I wanted to welcome everybody to our presentation on some of the changes that are going to take place in the PD&E process concerning the CEQ rules change. I'm now going to hand it over to Christine to go through the changes that are going to be implemented.
Good morning. The Council of Environmental Quality, or CEQ, has recently made changes to NEPA regulations in 40 CFR Parts 1500 to 1508. These changes went into effect last September, so OEM's been incorporating the changes into FDOT's procedure. Let's start with a little background information on the NEPA regulations. 40 CFR parts 1500 to 1508, they're the NEPA regulations for all of the agencies. And these were updated by CEQ last July, and the updates require the individual federal agencies to update their procedures to incorporate the changes that were made in this regulation by September of this year. Now, to date, we've only seen changes to this 49 CFR Part 13. And this is a new rule that's proposed by USDOT to update their NEPA procedures. And basically what they've done is taken the information from an old USDOT order and updated it to include the CEQ changes, as well as adding provisions from those prior Transportation Reauthorization Acts, Safety Lou, MAP 21, and the FAST Act. And the comment period on this proposed rule ended in December. So you can see that was pretty recent. And then another regulation, 23 CFR Part 771. This includes the NEPA procedures for Federal Highway, FRA, and FTA. And it supplements the CEQ regulations. And we anticipate seeing updates to this hopefully soon, to match those recent CEQ changes. And with the 40 CFR changes, there were several definitions that were updated. And I'm just going to go over those that you guys are going to see updated in the PD&E manual. First, it includes the definition of environmental document. Now, this is different than what we have as the DOT definition in the PD&E manual. In FDOT's definition, CEs are included along with the other document types, but we're not going to be changing this. This will remain the same. It's just going to be a little bit of difference between the two. Also, the definition of mitigation was updated, and you may see this updated throughout the PD&E manual. And they've included a definition for page number. A page is defined now as 500 words, and it doesn't include maps, diagrams, tables, graphs, or visuals. And this is really good to know because now page limits are set for EAs and EISs. And also the definition of reasonable alternatives was slightly modified to include meeting the goals of the applicant. The changes introduced a new role. This is called the Senior Agency Official, and this is an official of Assistant Secretary rank or higher. And now for FDOT, this is the Department Assistant Secretary for Engineering and Operations, who is currently Courtney Drummond. And in this role, he's the person to approve an extended time period for an EA or an EIS, and to set a new time period as well. And in this role, you must approve if an EA or an EIS is to be extended beyond the required page limits and to set a new page limit. And the senior agency official is also responsible for addressing any issues relating to purpose and need, alternatives, or any other issues that can affect the ability to meet the project schedule. Now, the regulation, it clarifies that agencies can designate more than one senior agency official for these different roles. And the OEM director, Jason Watts, will act as the senior agency official in the role of being the person who's responsible for that overall review of NEPA compliance and for resolving the implementation issues. the definition of significance was removed from the regulation, and basically they added some guidance that when considering if effects are significant, the agencies need to look at the potentially affected environment and the degree of the effects of the action. Now, this guidance will be included in the next revision of the PD&E Manual and also updated in trainings. The term cumulative impacts was also removed. However, cumulative impacts still need to be considered, as this concept was moved to a new definition that was created for effects or impacts. And these two words are interchangeable. And this new definition now includes impacts that were previously identified as direct, indirect, or cumulative. And we are waiting on guidance from Federal Highway before changing the terminology on impacts, as a lot of these terms are currently used in Federal Highway guidance documents. The class of action process, it remains the same. However, for anticipated EAs and EISs, the Director of OEM will formally approve the class of action determination within the EST. And the class of action determination form will now be will not be completed until after the ETDM programming screen and after some of these technical studies have been done, and also after coordination with OEM regarding the timing of that class of action submission and the determination. So basically more coordination and analysis now is needed early on before the class of action determination to ensure that these new timeframes can be met. There is a new definition of categorical exclusion, and this states that these actions normally do not have a significant effect on the human environment. And this replaced the definition that they would not individually or cumulatively have a significant effect. Also, FDOT can use CEs from other agencies' regulations, and this actually was already allowed under 23 CFR 771, but it's included here as well. So we can use the list of CEs for FTA or FRA. However, in order to do that, consultation with the agency must occur and be documented, and OEM is responsible for any of that coordination. So if going this route, the district should coordinate with OEM. There were several changes to EA requirements. And so now they must be completed within 1 year unless that senior agency official approves a longer time period in writing and sets a new limit. And this time frame is measured from the class of action determination to the publication of an EA or FONSI. And if it looks like a longer time frame is needed, then the district should coordinate with OEM, who will then coordinate with the Assistant Secretary. Also, the text of the EA should be no more than 75 pages. Now, this doesn't include the pages of appendices or the materials that are incorporated by reference. And if it looks like the EA needs to exceed these limits, then the district needs to coordinate with OEM, and then OEM will be the ones to request approval. Also, project websites or other publicly accessible means are needed to make the EA and the supporting information available. And so that districts can use project websites to make sure that the EA is available for review. Also, the EST is one of the ways that several of the districts share the environmental documents. You can add the document as a project attachment and republish the summary report. And this, provides notification to the ETAT and the public and makes the document available. For a finding of no significant impact. Now, the FONSI itself isn't included in that page limit requirement of an EA, but as the EA is modified to include the changes since the public hearing, it's going to need to remain within that 75-page limit. And also, I just mentioned with EAs, the project websites or other publicly accessible electronic means, such as the EST, should be used to make the EA with FONSI and the supporting information available to the public. Now, environmental impact statements, they're required now to be completed within 2 years. And that, again, is unless the senior agency official approves a longer time period in writing and provides a new limit. Now, this 2 years, it's measured from the issuance of that notice of intent to the record of decision. So what this means is the preparation of the draft EIS, that public review period, preparation of the final EIS, and the signing of the record of decision. All of this has to take place within this time frame. So in order to meet this time period, the district will need to coordinate with OEM early on to determine that timing of when to begin that notice of intent. And if it is anticipated that a longer time period may be needed, then the districts to coordinate with OEM will then again coordinate with the assistant secretary if approval is needed. The text of the EIS should be 150 pages or fewer. Now this includes actually only a couple of sections, the information in the project description and purpose and needs section, the alternative section, the environmental analysis section, so those 3 sections. And it doesn't include the pages of the executive summary or the appendices or any of those materials that are incorporated by reference. Now for projects that are of unusual scope or complexity, the text should be limited to no more than 300 pages, or if it ends up being one of those EISs that is a major infrastructure project that requires that one federal decision process, then the page limits may need to be exceeded. But in those cases, before being exceeded, it still needs to go through the process of coordinating with OEM and then OEM coordinating with the assistant secretary. Now the environmental document schedule template for EISs and RODs was abbreviated and updated on the PMS Codes website. So this is already up to date. So when you anticipate that an EIS is, your project's going to be an EIS, you'll need to coordinate with OEM, and they can help with determining what all can be done early for the project. Now the notice of intent is now to include a request specifically for comments on potential alternatives and impacts, identification of any relevant information, and studies or analysis of any kind concerning impacts affecting the quality of the human environment. And I did just read that because that is actually word for word from the regulations of what is needed to be in the notice of intent. And besides this request, the notice of intent actually also needs to provide some new information. It needs to now include the purpose and need, expected impacts, anticipated permits for the project, and also the anticipated schedule. Now, the districts to coordinate with OEM for guidance on how to incorporate this information until we receive more guidance from Federal Highway. For the draft EIS specifically, there are changes to the document format. And for now, the cumulative impacts section is going to remain. A new section is to be added, and this is a summary of submitted alternatives, information, and analyses. And this is what will be included. This will be included in the comments and coordination section. Also, the distribution list is being removed from the document as well as the index. Now, when the draft EIS is sent out for public comment, the publication should include an invitation for comment specifically on these items, the submitted alternative, the information and the analyses, and a summary that was included in the comments and coordination section. Now, this invitation needs to be included in the notice in the local newspaper, the notice of availability, and the EST distribution email. We're also looking at other places that this might need to be included as well. Project websites or other publicly accessible electronic means needs to be used to make the draft EIS and all the supporting information that's required available. They also need to provide for electronic submission of comments. So, and if there is not a project website, then the district needs to contact OEM for guidance on how to comply with this requirement. For final EISs, the cover page now needs to include an estimated total cost to prepare the draft EIS and the final EIS. Now, this should include the cost of personnel hours, contractors' costs, directors' costs, and if practicable, costs of the cooperating and participating agencies, and also applicants and contractors. Now, before preparing this cost estimate, please coordinate with OEM. We're hoping to get some more guidance on this as well. Also, the format changes that I went over with the draft EIS, they are also applicable to the final EIS. However, it should now include the comments received on that summary of submitted alternatives, information, and analysis. And this is done when updating the comments and coordination section. And as with the other environmental document, the documents, project websites, or other electronic means must be used to make this final EIS ROD and supporting information available. And if the project is a final EIS with a separate ROD, then the website needs to also provide for electronic submission of comments. And again, the district is to contact OEM for guidance if there's no project website. The record of decision should now actually include this statement that the DOT's considered all of the alternatives, information, analysis, and objections submitted by the state, tribal, and local governments and public commenters for consideration in developing the EIS. So basically, the alternatives, information, and analysis that was requested during that initial notice of intent, it's to be included in the new summary in the draft EIS for comment. Then comments on this information are then included in the final EIS, and then now that record of decision needs to certify that all of this information has been considered. There are several changes that we would like to get guidance from Federal Highway before incorporating into the PD&E manual and the ETDM manual. There was a new definition of major federal action, and it doesn't include non-federal projects with minimal federal funding or involvement. So we're hoping to get some clarification on what the threshold of minimal is. Also, once the Federal Highway NEPA procedures are updated, they should include a list of actions that are not subject to NEPA. Also, they should have a list of actions that normally require preparation of an EIS or an EA, and also a list of CE actions and extraordinary circumstances, and it will note which ones require documentation. So once we get that information, we'll incorporate that as well. That will be some useful information, I'm sure. Also, Federal Highway is working on a formula to help develop that estimated total cost to prepare the draft EIS and final EIS. Guidance is also needed on how to invite comments specifically on those submitted alternatives, information, and analysis in the summary in the publication of the notice of availability in the Federal Register. Also, updates to terminology such as the indirect, direct, and cumulative effects in Federal Highway NEPA procedures and guidance is needed as well. So please let us know if you have any questions. You can add them in the questions and we can go ahead and address them at this time.
Okay, this is Pete. We do have some questions, and we do have a good team of folks that are on. Obviously, we have Christine, we have myself, Pete McGilvery. We've got obviously Jason on the call. We also have Katasha Cornwell. We also have Tu Clark. So we did get a couple of questions. So I'm going to read off each question if one of our team members can reach out and answer. And make sure that if you're going to answer that you're also unmuting yourself, because right now I can see I'm the only one that is unmuted. So the first question is, if a page of text in an EA has about 250 words, would that count as half page? There are no figures or tables. Do the table of contents count towards the page limits? So it's a little clarity on what the 250 words means, what actually is counted in there and what's not.
Sorry, was this for an EIS? It's only actually 3 sections of the EIS itself that count for those page limits. Is that purpose?
Specifically addressed an EA.
An EA.
Yeah.
There's actually not as much guidance on what is considered with the EA, but I would believe it would just be the text in the document itself, not the table of contents. Basically, of course, we haven't gotten to this yet, but it would most likely, I would think, be the same types of information that an EIS, the bulk of the information, not necessarily table of contents.
Yeah, let me jump in. I agree with Christine. This is Jason Watts. I think that they've been pretty specific when it comes to page limits, and it's basically the actual body of the document, not necessarily the supporting information, cover sheets, a table of contents, and any addendum, attachments, graphics. I think that's the way we'll read it as a state until we get further guidance, and we may get further guidance coming up in the future. Pete, if you want to go to the next one.
Sure, thanks, Jason. Okay, so the next question was actually in regarding starting the 1 and 2 year clock. So here's the question: can we go over again at the end of when a COA determination would occur, starting the 1 and 2 year time clock? So just we went through it kind of quickly. The districts just want a little more about when we do the CED. When should we be performing the COA determination or an EA or an EIS, and how that works into starting the 1 or 2 day clock, depending if it's an EA or an EIS.
Sure. So let me describe it like this, and we'll talk about it simply. As the class of action is determined, the clock starts running. So what we've recognized in Florida is a lot of work can be done prior to the class of action. And this also covers a couple of the other questions that we've been asked, Pete. So as the class of action is determined, the clock starts. So we need to do some kind of pre-work. We need to do some of the technical studies. We need to do some of the legwork prior to starting that class of action. So what you're going to see going forward is class of action determinations for EA and EIS are going to be looked at differently in central office. We're going to be coming back to the district many times and saying, what have you done to prepare for this class of action? That way we're in a very solid position to meet the 1 and 2 year timeframes. We've also, one of the questions, and I'll skip ahead a second, it says, do we need to ask Courtney Drummond for extended page limits at the start of the projects? Can be made later. So first, any request that you have that's going to go to Courtney concerning page limits or time frame needs to come through OEM. They need to come through this office before it gets up to Courtney. And second, we anticipate and hope that we're never in that position, because if we do a correct issuance of class of actions where appropriate amount of prior work has already been done, then we are in the belief that you can still meet all the timeframes, and that we're in the since a lot of the, and I'm going to say, quote, extra stuff is not included in the page limits. We're assuming meeting the page limit shouldn't be an issue. Those should really be the very, very rare occurrences, and we think that we can get through without having to make those requests. I hope that answers a couple of those questions.
I think so, Jason. Here's another one. If an EIS is 2 years from NOI to ROD, are references to it being an EIS prior to that class of action determination damaging to the process as being part of the administrative record for that project? Is there a concern with how we call the project before the COA is actually official?
No, absolutely. And I think what we're going to do going forward is you're going to start referring to things as an anticipated EIS or an anticipated EA, or you can say a class of action that is yet to be determined. So clearly you're not going to call stuff an EIS or an EA prior to the official class of action date. So as you do any of those technical studies, we're going to have to work on that wording. You know, it's a new area for all of us, and it's kind of changing our mindset on how we look at those projects. But, you know, kind of being a little less definitive on what specific class of action we have is what we're going to have to do in those documents.
And we did have someone follow up exactly on that and say, you know, the technique they use is it's a potential EA or a potential EIS is how they do it in the district that responded. So that was good. Another question, we talked a lot about making the documentation, whether it's the EA itself and the supporting documentation of the EIS and the supporting documentation available electronically on publicly accessible sites. And then that prompted a question, do we still need to make paper copies available in addition?
Right now, until things change, and look, I'd love to be able to go to a completely virtual world where we didn't have to make paper copies available, but I don't believe we're there yet. So please continue to do that just to make them available for inspection.
Great. Another question for a draft EIS, why keep cumulative impacts if we have this new page limit requirement?
Okay, so look, I'm going to be frank with you that I've been one of the people that said, hey, I think they took out cumulative impacts. They didn't really. What they did is they just kind of renamed things and rearranged things. We're still going to do it because the courts basically haven't caught up to the idea that you don't have to do it. And we believe that there's very much certainty that you still have to look at what used to be called cumulative impacts. Now they're just rolled into the overall impact. So yeah, yes, we still have to look at them.
Great. Let's see, we've got another question that's probably timely for some folks out there. Will any of these changes apply to those EAs and EISs that are already ongoing that started before the September 15th, 2020?
No, they're not retroactive. They only apply to projects that had a class of action determination after the date Pete just said. So there's no concern there. That being said, I'd like you all to think about it as you're going through older EAs and EISs, or even EAs and EISs that may have started before that date. Everything's going to get looked at, and it's going to be difficult to argue why one EA that started 10 days before is, you know, 1,000 pages, and then the one after is 100 pages. Along with those lines, and I know it's outside of the scope of this presentation, but understand it's going to get very difficult to articulate why some CEs may take longer than EAs and EISs. So just keep that in the back of your mind as we process the work.
Thank you, Jason. And right now there's just one more question, and you addressed most of it, and it had to do with coordinating with Courtney Drummond on extended page limits, and you talked about having to go through OEM. But the second part of that question that wasn't addressed specifically was the idea that what if that request comes up mid-process, like you think you're on target for page limits, then you go to the public hearing, and then you recognize that what comes out a little bit later in the process is going to extend you potentially past those page limits. Is it okay at any point in the process, or can it only be done in the beginning to kind of ask for that approval to go beyond the page number requirement?
And I'll be honest with this question. I think there's no circumstance in where you'll ask for those time frames and page limits to be extended prior to working on the project. All of the requests should be coming in later in the process after you realize you're not going to make it. We should have we should be walking forward with every thought that we're going to make the time limit and the page limit and do everything we can to make those. Extending it is not something to be taken lightly. That's why it's so elevated in US DOT. And understand that right now, we are under the understanding that it's going to be Courtney Drummond to answer that question for us. There is completely still the possibility that we have to take it to the Assistant Secretary of US DOT. That is yet to be settled. The rule wasn't super clear as it pertained to NEPA assignment states, so we're still working with FHWA on that. But understand this should really, I can't emphasize it enough, it should really be the exception, not the norm, and it should be very, very rare that we have to do that.
Great. And we just got one more question kind of tied to that on page limits. And really the question is tied to, has there been any new page limit discussion on supporting technical documents, so NREs, CSARs, et cetera, or any indications that these are anticipated or forthcoming? I guess folks are recognizing page limits on EAs and EISs, and there's a concern that it'll waterfall down to the technical documents. Is there any thoughts or movement in that direction that we're aware of, either within Florida or nationally?
I haven't heard any at all. I haven't heard any talking to either AASHTO or the feds. I don't anticipate it. If anything, I think what we've heard is that a lot of the page limits are very arbitrary, and they're understanding that some of the technical documents may end up having that same information, because in order to do a good job, sometimes you have to write pages, and that's the way it is. I think that appreciation is there.
Great, thanks, Jason. So we've reached the end of our questions. If anybody else has anything, you've got a couple seconds to go ahead and type those in. I do want to apologize for early on our audio technical difficulties. I'm glad that we were able to stop and restart with you guys in a live format. And I just wanted to extend my thanks to Christine, Jason, Katasha, and Tu for helping us out. And it looks like, another question was, will we be sharing the slides? So the answer is yes, we'll definitely be sharing the slides. We'll also be sharing the recording as well. We'll clean it up and make it accessible on our website, and you'll be able to go to both. You'll be able to refer back to this recording as well as pull down the PowerPoint and have access to that PowerPoint as well. So that's a good question. And not seeing anything else, I think that's it for us today. When this information becomes available, we'll make sure that everybody receives an email with a link and copies. And we thank you all. Have a great afternoon, and we'll talk to you later.